So I believe the last time we had a member of parliament speak for our group, it was in the late 1990s when MP Sven Robinson was actually taking humanist petitions to Ottawa to try to get God out of the Charter and the Anthem. That didn't actually work, unfortunately. But it is interesting that the next MP that we're inviting is also from Burnaby-Douglas, and Kennedy Stewart joins us today. He's the official opposition critic for science and technology, and he's a former professor, or still a professor, I guess, just on leave from Simon Fraser University. And with that, I'll let Kennedy give us a few words about science policy in Canada. There's a lot of concerns about scientists being muzzled, about climate change. And with that,
welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great group. It's nice to start chatting Sunday morning, chatting with folks with whom I share similar beliefs. So that's a nice way to start any Sunday. So I'm here, I was invited here this morning to talk about science policy, and just what's happening with science in Canada from a government perspective. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was elected in May of 2011, and when I started in Parliament, of course, there were a lot of us rookies there, about 100 of us with Jack Layton as leader. There's been a lot that's changed since we were elected. And as some of us began to learn the ropes, we got appointed to different positions. So I started off as the critic for natural resources, the associate critic for natural resources, kind of focused on pipelines. So that maybe I'll come back and do another talk about that someday. But last year, when Tom O'Carroll was elected as our leader, I was shifted over to be the critic for science and technology, and it's been a very interesting portfolio, because the first thing I asked was, well, what's the party's policy on science and technology? And they showed me a big blank page. They said, we've been such a small party for so long, we've focused on some key areas, but there are certain areas that we actually haven't had a chance to fill out yet, or to talk about in any great detail. So Tom said, well, will this be something that you could do? Do you think you could kind of go across Canada and talk to scientists and develop new science policy for the NDP that we can talk about in more detail in the next election? So that's what I've been tasked with doing, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how that's going. But it's been very exciting. I can tell you we have our convention coming up in April, which will be in Montreal, and I can assure you that there will be a much more hearty edition of our policy book, which will include quite a lot about what the NDP wants to do with science in Canada. And there's a lot to be done, let me tell you. So when I was introduced to this portfolio, the first thing I did is went to meet my opponent on the other side, Gary Goodyear, who is the Science and Technology Minister of State. It's not a full ministerial position, but it is quite a hefty position, I would say, in terms of with the Minister of Industry, of course, is really the lead in that area, with science and technology being attached to that portfolio. Mr. Goodyear has quite strong religious beliefs himself, and is not necessarily a big fan of science, which I found quite quickly in a number of exchanges that we've had in the House and on committee. In fact, we have ministers come to our committees. I'm on the industry committee. They have to explain their budgetary estimates. They have to explain their policies to us occasionally. So one thing I did challenge him with last time he was at committee is his 6% cut to science funding in Canada. So that when we had our budget in last year, there was lots going on about cuts to environmental regulations and approval processes. But what really flew under the radar was this fairly massive cut to basically discovery-based research. And it was a 6% cut. So I did ask Mr. Goodyear about this, and he said, no, we've invested more money than any other government in the history of Canada into science. And I said, well, Statistics Canada says right here, and I showed him the table, that you've cut 6%, and he goes, I don't read Statistics Canada. He doesn't believe in it as an institution. So to show you what we're up against is that's kind of what we're up against. Is this a very vitriolic attack on knowledge in Canada. So I will go back and kind of outline what kind of form that's taking. And there's really three things that are happening. The first is a muzzling of scientists, government scientists, and increasingly it's not just government scientists that are being muzzled, it's also this kind of culture of fear that's crept into the academy as well as nonprofit groups in terms of what the government will do to them if they speak out against the government, if they speak truth to power, what will happen. So I'll go into a bit of detail about that. There is the overall cut to scientific funding of at least 6%, with probably more coming, and that's a fairly massive cut. Then in our scientific institutions, there's also a change of how the money that's left is being spent. And I think those are, so I'll just kind of walk through those 3 points, and then perhaps, and feel free to stop me anytime, ask questions, I'm happy to do that. And maybe I can fill in with more of your questions at the end. So in terms of muzzling, being the science and technology critic, I've been talking to a lot of scientists across Canada face to face, but increasingly getting emails from, these little, we call them brown envelopes in the past, well they're I guess brown emails now, with scientists explaining to us exactly what's happening within their government departments or within their research institutes. And essentially, and I've experienced this myself, if you're a scientist who has worked for the government, especially in the area of environmental science, and you have some kind of finding, a paper finding, not only really does this now have to be vetted before it can go to academic journals or be approved for academic journals, if you previously published something and you go to a conference and want to discuss this, what you can say will be vetted by the government, and they will send what we would call them communication flags to sit beside you and kind of tell you what you can say and can't say. This is a quite dangerous situation and becoming more widespread. Now, scientists, not necessarily the most political folks in the world, and I'm very happy for that. I'm glad, we had a march on Parliament Hill, and we had the Death of Science rally last year. We're having more of that this year. So I think of all these brilliant minds, they're spending all their time fighting back against this when I think they should be in their labs and in their classrooms teaching instead. And I think we're in a very unfortunate situation where this energy is being negatively put into fighting for what in the past we would think to be just something that happens, that scientists find things, that whether social scientists or natural scientists or engineers or technologists, and they can just tell the world their findings and share, because all knowledge is based on what went before. So if we don't share internationally, the international community won't share with us. And increasingly we're hearing this from outside. So the muzzling can be quite specific. We heard a lot about the fisheries. We've also heard a lot about environmental science, and we don't really have to go down the climate change route, because we do know that that's a very unpopular topic, with a lot of money being shifted away from that area of study. In terms of the cuts, the second point, the cuts, there's this 6% kind of overall cut to science, but there's also, I think more alarmingly, an overall reduction in global spending in Canada on research and development. We used to spend just over 2% of our gross domestic product on research and development, scientific endeavors. We're down to about 1.7%, so actually that's a massive drop from the public and the private sector that have stopped investing in exploration of ideas, with, I think, a further fall to come. So I would not be surprised if we went from 2.2% of our GDP down to 1.5% of our GDP in terms of investing in new ideas and innovation. To put this in contrast with the rest of the world, we have places like Korea, Israel, that are spending 4% of their GDP on this kind of work. In the United States, I was very excited. Barack Obama, in a 2009 speech, said that he would commit 3% of the entire GDP of the United States to research and development, which is something that I've been talking to the NDP about and trying to get that in our policy, perhaps not a specific number, but that will match our closest competitors, because when companies and great scientific minds are looking for where they want to go in the world, because they can go anywhere, they want to go places where they know that they'll be appreciated and supported, and they'll be able to sit with like minds and do the kind of research they need to do. So it's not just the government cuts to science and research and development that's important. It's also our private sector is not investing really at all, in very, very small amounts in this area. Just to add to the depressing Sunday morning, when we get to how funding is being redistributed. So I'll give you a concrete example. The National Research Council, very famous institution that gives us the, we know what the correct time is at the sound of the long dash or silence, that it'll be 10 o'clock. The National Research Council is a $1 billion a year organization. What they've done is they've replaced the head of the National Research Council would have been a scientist in the past. They've now replaced the head with a gentleman named Mr. McDougall, who is essentially been sent in to demolish this institution. And I have had him on a committee as well. There's massive changes happening within the National Research Council. We have about 1,000 scientists in the National Research Council now. I wouldn't be surprised if by April or May it was down to about 500. There's pink slips being handed out all over this institution, and in fact the scientists are fleeing for other academic institutions or out of the country. So the whole push from the Conservative government is that there is a supply chain, or you would call it a chain, of how ideas come to the market. Essentially you have blue sky discovery thinking that takes a long time, you have plenty of failures, and you have some small successes, and then this idea becomes tested through rigorous scientific peer review process. It becomes more or less a fact. And then what happens is you have technologists turn these ideas into some kind of more practical device, and then you have the market come in and essentially commercializes the idea. And so you have these three different steps. What's happening in Canada is the first step that we have, our blue sky discovery thinking, is currently probably one of the best in the world. Our production of peer-reviewed research is unparalleled in many areas. Our universities are very, very highly ranked. We have some of the top scientific minds in Canada. So our production of new ideas is actually very, very high, and we're recognized for that. Where our problem is in Canada is that we don't seem to take those ideas and commercialize them and turn them into something we can sell. And that, you want economic growth, that's what you kind of have to do. You have to innovate, you have to take new ideas, and whether it's different ways of treating cancer or whether it's different ways of slicing bread, there's something, this has to, you use the scientific ideas to move it ahead. The real reason why we haven't had this kind of breakthroughs like you would associate with countries like Korea or Germany is because the business side of things, the businesses have not been investing in this commercialization process. They tend to use the same old ideas and don't really reach back and bring the new ideas forward. This is done in other countries. So the Conservatives see this, we see this. We have one of the lowest productivity rates in Canada has one of the lowest productivity rates in all of the Western world, mainly because we don't commercialize and bring new technology and new ideas into our businesses. So what the Conservatives have said, well, we both recognize this problem, but their solution is to say, for some reason, universities and academics are the problem. We're too productive on our discovery end of things. And what they're doing is they're shifting the money away from, I think, the strongest part of our supply chain for ideas, and they're moving it to business. So essentially, the money that would go to scientists and students and new equipment for new breakthroughs is being shifted so it becomes a business subsidy. And this is essentially what you're going to see with the National Research Council. It's going to go, the National Research Council currently produces about 3% of all peer-reviewed publications in Canada, which is, when you think on a worldwide basis, it's quite an active and quite an essential component of new ideas. Peer review is no longer a criteria in the National Research Council. They won't count that anymore as something that they're proud of or want their staff to do. What they're doing is bringing in a massive number of business managers that will attract industry in to have scientists essentially at the National Research Council. And this is in the words of the science minister himself, is for it to be a 1-800 concierge service for business. So you're a scientist with at the National Research Council, some business will phone you up and say, you know, can you, I don't know, can you make this widget a little bit smaller or something, and you'll have the National Research Council scientists figure that all out for you. The company will go away and own the intellectual property, and the scientists at the National Research Council will not be doing research for Canadians. So this is coming this year. This is not some kind of NDP fantasy world. This is something that you'll start to see this year, and that's one example of what's happening with scientific institutions in Canada. We have others. We have social sciences, humanities, and research council. We have health research bodies. We have, of course, NSERC, the scientific research bodies. All of those are being transformed in the same way as the National Research Council. So, for example, as a student, scientific student, in the past you would get scholarships to study whatever you want. Now, most of those scholarships are, the string attached is you have to do something of value to industry. And so this is happening more and more through our research institutions, and you can imagine if you're a philosopher, you know, what use will industry have for your ideas? You know, the good companies actually do hire philosophers, but very few medium companies would have any use for historians or philosophers or dancers or anybody that would get these kind of grants, and it's all moved towards you know, serving industry. Now there is a certain value of that. There's a certain value of industry being productive, and it's not that it's anti-industry, it's that to take the money that has been fueling for such a long time discovery in Canada and shifting it away from that to become a business subsidy, I think is a big problem. So those are the three things that I've noticed in the last year have been critic of this area. So what we decided to do is that we don't have a science policy in Canada. We do not have a national science policy. We've never had one. They've been trying since 1920 in Canada to bring a national science policy to Canada, to say to Canadians, this is what science is for, this is how it should be funded, and this is where we're going to be going. So that's what I've been tasked to do, is to develop a national science policy for the NDP, which I'm very happy about. We've on my website, you'll see we have our initial discussion paper, which is called, as all good initial papers should be called, Toward a National Science Policy, where we are having discussions with scientists. We're having their ideas on how do we get consistent funding, how do we make sure that our students are adequately funded, how do we retain our brains in Canada and not have them all leave, how do we attract the best thinkers to Canada and have them stay. All those things we're working towards having concrete policy that we'll be putting forward in the 2015 election. I can't talk about more specifics of things, but I thought maybe if there are other things you'd like me to discuss, I'm happy to do that. So maybe I'll just leave it there and answer any questions you might have.